All right, AP Psych. Next step is the perception part. It is a little more complex, basically because you now have experiences, expectations, influencing them, so you can have a lot of different ways to perceive. So what we're really looking at here are not all the different ways. We'll talk about some of those, but we're really looking at the shortcuts, the ways we make the brain more efficient, and the rules in which our brain perceives and interprets, specifically vision here. Maybe. So, main thing we look at with the start of perception, it's going to start with the school of psych that was really back in the late 1800s with structuralism, functionalism. This is Gestalt psychology. So basically what Gestalt psychology means is we want the organized whole. Like, for example, when you are asked at home, what did you do in school? You give them a rough overall answer like, we did work, we did stuff, we did nothing. Rarely do you go class by class to tell them. So instead of doing the individual parts of your day, the classes, you just give them the whole spiel. So here we're not looking at, so with this, we wouldn't worry about like the trichromatic, the opponent processing theory. We wouldn't worry about how it gets into the sensory systems. We're only worried about how we perceive the whole image. So basically what Gestalt psychologists are going to give us is the principles by which we perceive groups. So how do we group objects together? That's the main thing they really provide. And that's really the sticking point of what they provide. There's other things they studied, but it doesn't hold up as our technology increases. So kind of like you see the school's one building, you don't see the individual bricks, you don't see the individual windows and the doors. So like the individual bricks, the windows, the doors would be the sensations, and then the one building would be the perception. So Gestalt psychologists, don't worry about this, we're worried about this, that perception. So basically they're going to give us the grouping rules. So these are still used today, and we're going to show you some examples, but the main is proximity, continuity, closure, and then you can also argue there would be similarity, but that's one we'll talk about as it gets closer. So, grouping law of proximity, you usually will see this as two different groups. This is a group, this is a group, because of that space there. But you're not seeing 12 dots, you're really seeing two groups of 6 dots. Continuity, even though you don't see the lines continuing, you can see how this line diverges. So we see them as continuous, and then the one that really influences closure. Truthfully, there is no triangle there, but because we want to fill in the gaps, these little Pac-Man face circles, I guess they are just circles with a chunk out of it, but those create the triangle itself. So those are the main rules. So like if you go to Birkdale and you see 3 groups of kids that are close together, you're going to see those, you're going to assume or make the assumption that those kids know each other, and most likely they do. So this is also what we would also look at. This is going to help us form those assumptions too. So when we look at forming perceptions, as we experience the world, we're going to start to create these constancies. And really all these constancies are just shortcuts that when they do go wrong, there's really no penalty for getting it wrong. So it's like if I would let you take a test as many times as you wanted until you felt comfortable with a grade, you wouldn't worry about the test because you have plenty of time. There's no really penalty for missing a question because you get another chance. That's what these constancies are. So these are all going to form around light, the changes we go through, but these are essentially just shortcuts. So basically, when we look at our ability to form the constancy, it does depend on our experience with that object. No experience, no constancy, and I'm not sure why I put that C there, so I guess we'll see. So developing constancies allow for efficient shortcuts. So your brain always wants to be efficient. And in fact, in some cases, it wants to be more efficient than right at times. But the brain is just like a computer, so it's going to create these constancies. And really, these are just shortcuts, cognitive shortcuts, so we can see things. We don't have to focus on it. We don't have to divert our attention to something that is less important. So when we look at the constancies, size constancy, like if you would, like if you're in my class and you look out the window and you see cars coming towards you on 115, truthfully what is happening, on the retina, the object is growing in size, but you're not surprised by the overall size of the car because you've experienced that. Shape constancy. Once you see a shape for something, it's hard to unsee the shape. I mean, so you're really just looking at the outline, the angles, the form of it. We want the similar objects to keep its shape. It's not like a circle's going to turn into a triangle, or if you see a roll of tape, you know automatically that that's a circle. You don't have to think about it again. And then brightness constancy. Like if you see an object, if you've seen an object illuminated in light, and then you see it in dim light, you'll still see it as the same. Like I think the one that they usually use, and I probably should look this up before I started it, but well, we'll be on that. If you look at a red brick house at dusk, truthfully what is reflected on your retina is that brick actually looks more grayish, but you still see it as red. Because if you would technically see it as gray at one point and then you saw it as red, you'd actually spend way more time staring at a brick house than you need to. And I don't know, who's going to stare? Yeah, no. These just help you from doing weird things like that. So visual cues, these are going to be how we make sense or how we see depth. There's going to be two. These are just going to be cues that allow us to see the depth quicker before it's actually processed. So just your quick depth perception judges. Monocular cues use one eye. Binocular uses both eyes. The monocular cues in your book, easiest kind of way to think of those are ways people who are painters, artists, those are ways you give a painting depth. But that's also meaning if you lose sight in one eye, you can still see depth. Because truthfully, if you look at what is being sent to the brain by only one eye, you shouldn't be able to see depth. But we're going to look at some of the binocular today, and we'll save the monocular for later. So, the visual cliff, this is how they test, baby. This is really just a test to see if depth perception is built in or is it something developed. So, basically what they do is they have this table, the pattern's there, and there's a glass bottom, but it looks like the pattern, and the pattern actually dips down. So the idea is if the baby is hesitant to crawl out, then they can see depth. If the baby continues to crawl, then depth perception is learned. But from studies, more of the children actually hesitate. So this really shows us that even one of the most important perceptions visually, experience, expectations influence it. Experience and expectations do not influence it because this is important, so it's inborn. So it's inborn, not learned. So the babies were all hesitant. Now, one thing they do with this, and this is a little just an addition, this is one of the first tests for like a learning disability. Because if a child necessarily doesn't have inborn the depth perception, the cognitive ability to see that depth, then that could also lead us to learning disabilities and most notably the autism spectrum disorder. So, our binocular cues, retinal disparity, this is the first one. Each retina, because you have two eyes, gets a slightly different image. Then your occipital lobe puts them together and then we get depth. Basically what retinal disparity, if you could look at it through your retina without the occipital lobe correcting it, you'd be looking at a 3D movie without the glasses. Because if you take your glasses off if you take your 3D glasses off in a 3D movie, it looks blurry, and that's because both of those, there's two pictures that are slightly overlapped, but not overlapped perfectly. So the glasses put them over top correctly, and then that gives you the depth. That's essentially what your occipital lobe does to the images portrayed on your retina. And 3D movies are the ones that exaggerate it. Convergence, this is just reading the neuromuscular cues in the eyes. So as soon as your eye muscles move inwards, the object is coming towards you. As soon as they move away, the object is going away from you. So if the eye muscles move out, we can see that the object's going away, or if they move in, it's coming towards us. But this again, this is just a whoops. This is just a shortcut to see depth. Struggling with that clicking there. Perceptual set. This is basically just proving the idea of experiences, expectations influencing us. So basically, once you have enough experience and expectation, you have a predisposition to perceive one thing over another. Like one of the mental predispositions for all of students is whenever a teacher gives an assignment, it's looked at as more of a punishment, busy work, or something that's not important. Because one of the perceptual sets we have are students versus teachers, where there's actually way more similarities than there are, but our perception prevents us from seeing that. But basically, it's just a mental predisposition, hard to get over. It's kind of like a belief. If you've ever tried to change someone's belief, there's a bell. Very hard to do. It's also hard to change a perceptual set. So it's usually basically the result of new stimuli assimilated into our current schemas. So when we look at perceptual set, there you should see more of a guy playing a saxophone. You should probably still see the guy playing the saxophone there, even though it's more of the face. Now if you take that away, you could probably see the face more. And then now that the face has been primed, the face is more deliberate. But then if you put all three up, you can kind of see both. But that just basically, we're prone to see people in faces, so we can see that in those. So basically, depending on which picture was flanked first, depending on what you saw. Another one we can look at, this is probably not some deep sea monster or dinosaur that survived. It's a floating log. But if you believe in the Loch Ness Monster, hey, that's the Loch Ness Monster. Just like if you believe in UFOs, you think those might be spaceships instead of clouds. It's like people who are conspiracy theorists, even if their conspiracy is proven false, it's hard to change them. Like flat earthers. People still believe the earth is flat. Sure. Context effects. This is basically just, again, highlighting the idea that expectations, influences, dictate or influence what we perceive. So one of the things I always go with context effects, the first time I ever saw, and this is grade school, the first time I ever saw a teacher outside of school, I was shocked. Because as a kindergartner, first grade, second grader, my context was I only saw them at school, so surely they lived at school. So it was shocking to see them somewhere else. Also, you may have seen teachers out, or teachers may have seen you out, but you didn't see them, partly because they're dressed in a more casual style. So those are some things. But traditions, customs, stereotypes, beliefs, experiences, they all heavily influence us. Like for us, it's obvious that these people are sitting in a house. There's a pillar to brace the ceiling. That's a window. But if you grow up in more of a potential tribal setting or more of a third world country where houses may not truly only be used to eat and sleep in, some people never see windows in a house. Some people never see poles in a house. So if you would show that to them, they wouldn't have context for it. Like this is basically shown to different groups of people to see what they see. So like if they show this to someone from an East African country, the woman is balancing a box of some sort on her head because they have to carry things long distances, so they will use every opportunity to get an extra jug of water, box of food, whatever it is, to their family, so they will balance things on their head. And then they see this not as a pillar inside, but this would be a tree. Because in their experience, trees and boxes are more experienced than windows and pillars. So context effects, same thing as the expectations, belief, the influences on our perception. And this also dictates that we may not truly see the world for itself. We see how it makes sense to us. So, honestly, this is where it does get complicated. This is also, there's a lot of theories with this unit. So anything you feel that I did not say well or explain well, ask. Ask me or Carr. And if Carr can't answer it, you know what he's going to do? He's going to call down to me, and then I'm going to try to help him explain.